evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 14 joint work session between the Ann Arbor City Council and the Downtown Development Authority, where we will hear all sorts of good things and talk about more. Mr. Lazarus, Ms. Pillay.
I'm going to turn it over to Susan.
Okay. See if I can do this. Don't you hate when the technology doesn't work? There is. Fantastic. I can push this button. Okay, we're good to go. Okay. Keith, do you want to welcome us as chair?
Sure. So this slide says it all. Why are we here? And of course, one of the reasons we're here is that we're required to by the parking agreement. It requires that there be an Ann Arbor City Council and DDA joint work session. And of course, in addition, we'd also like to use this as an opportunity to share some of our guiding principles and how they shape our work. And we look forward, of course, to hearing your commitment and values as well. We have an agenda. The agenda for tonight includes a quick capital project and parking system update. The parking system, of course, being the reason we're here. Based on the October 7th City Council meeting, we know that we also need to take some time to discuss the Ann Ashley parking structure expansion project. And if there's time, we'd also like to talk about future projects. So let's see. I hand it over now to Molly McFarland and Jessica Litaw, who are going to talk about the people-friendly streets and other capital improvement projects. Where are they? There's Jessica, there's Molly.
Are you managing the clicking?
I'm going to do it.
All right, fantastic.
Unless you like it.
No, you're great. You're great. I think you're clicker master at this point.
All
right. Sorry, just catching up to where we are. So within our capital projects, we've been putting significant effort towards building our people-friendly streets. One of the things that we know is that alleys and streets make up 30% of the land in the downtown. As a result, they have a significant impact on the downtown experience, and they're a tremendous opportunity for us to improve quality of place. In addition to addressing infrastructure, street projects allow us to address many broad-ranging priorities, from equitable access to sustainability, and most importantly, safety, and a commitment to Vision Zero. We've been working towards this commitment for a few years now, and a recent conference of the National Association of City Transportation Officials reinforced this direction. They used it as an opportunity to remind us of our collective roles as caretakers and good stewards, particularly when it comes to designing streets for kids, equity, and sustainability. We were struck by what a collaborative and positive viewpoint this provides. In 2017, we began construction on a series of street projects with these goals in mind, ranging from sidewalk widening to protected bike lanes to two-way traffic restoration. In 2018, we collaborated with the city to address Fifth Avenue and Detroit Street. At the project start, we heard significant concerns about the safety of the street and crosswalks, particularly related to speed and the double threat that occurs when one lane of traffic stops and the other does not. We focused the design to address these concerns, including installing a pedestrian refuge island. I'm sorry, Susan, can you go back one? I signaled, but I didn't actually mean it. Including installing a pedestrian refuge island and narrowing the travel lanes. These design elements help to encourage drivers to drive more slowly and be more aware. In the case of a double threat, the island also provides a place for people to stop as they cross. So far, the results have been extremely positive. The firm collecting data has looked at 3 categories of people crossing: those who crossed without a vehicle present, those who crossed with a vehicle present and the driver stopped, and those who crossed with a vehicle present and the driver did not stop. When we looked at those who crossed with a vehicle present, the results are amazing. Before improvements, only 48% of drivers stopped, And after, it was 97%. You can see that in the bottom right. And if it's helpful, data was captured at the same time of year when CHS was in session. So we're looking at apples to apples when it comes to the data. The Huron Street improvements are underway. We're still waiting to hear back on some of our requests from MDOT, including the request for a full signal at 3rd and Huron. The left turn signal at 5th Avenue, we're anticipating a 14% crash reduction. That has been approved. A full signal at 3rd and Chapin to replace the Hawk signal that's there right now. We're waiting on an MDOT study that I think I understand is happening this fall. Pedestrian signals and leading pedestrian intervals, we're anticipating a 59% vehicle and pedestrian crash rate reduction. Those have been denied, and we're re-requesting. No right on red along the corridor. We're anticipating a 3% crash rate reduction, and that's been approved. We're wrapping up construction on William Street, the city's first two-way protected bike lane. We look forward to seeing everybody at the grand opening on October 27th from 2 to 4 p.m. Given that this is a new feature for our community and the emphasis is on safety, we understand the importance of creating and distributing educational materials. The First and Ashley project will begin construction next year, which includes two-way restoration on both of those streets, a two-way protected bikeway on one of those streets, improved lighting, and more. We plan to improve this commitment to safe streets with another round of planning and design for people-friendly streets, including the State Street Improvement Project. We're also working to understand how alley improvements may help with the implementation of the Solid Waste Master Plan. Lastly, we're continuing our commitment to right-of-way repairs for some of these elements, like bricks, benches, and bike parking, that the DDA is the only agency that maintains and installs.
This, again, as noted earlier, one of the elements that we'd like to talk about later on tonight is the Anna National Garage. Phil, as the chair of Operations Committee.
Oh, I can do this, right?
Yeah.
Jada, come on up. Good evening, my name is Phil Weiss. I'm the chair of the Operations Committee. I can see here that you didn't plan for tall people. Jess did a really good job explaining our capital improvement projects. I'm taking a different tack tonight. I'm going to introduce one of our very talented DDA staff people, Jada Hallbrook. Practiced 3 times this afternoon. To go through some of the our parking projects and parking data that I think you all should have before we get to the Ann Ashley discussion. So if you don't mind, let's I'd like to defer to Jada for that, and then we'll come back to the Ann Ashley discussion. Jada.
So when the DDA assumed responsibility for the public parking system, it developed a set of what we call parking principles to guide our investment in and our management of the parking system. We make decisions around the parking system with these larger goals in mind. In the past year, other than some small changes to the meter space inventory to account for removals for some pedestrian crossings and bike lanes, there have not been any major changes to the space count. On the bottom half of the slide, we've outlined the larger changes that happened in 2017, as well as possible changes resulting from city projects and initiatives or land sales. We have some financial information here. Revenues are up slightly in fiscal year 19 over fiscal year 18, but given the rate increases that started to take effect during this time period, overall system use is flat. The DDA uses its fund balance and transfers to the parking maintenance fund to carry out a pretty robust maintenance and restoration plan. We have a 20-year document that we use to plan and budget for anticipated repairs well into the future.
And Jada, correct me if I'm wrong, there's somewhere between $2 and $4 million that goes into maintenance and repair every year into the garages. Okay.
Yes. And additionally, the net revenues are saved for upcoming capital projects or equipment purchases. 20% of the gross parking revenue is transferred to the city, and since 2015, this has totaled $24 million. So in April of 2018, the DDA board approved a 5-year plan for rate changes. The approach was to schedule small annual rate changes that would be predictable for users. Meter hourly rates and some monthly permit rates are increasing, but the hourly rate and the structures is staying the same. Meter rates increased in April of 2018 and then again in 2019. And we are now up from $1.60 an hour at the meters to $1.90. And as you can see, there are 3 more rate changes scheduled. It's been difficult to measure the impact of the rate changes because at the same time as these rate changes were happening, we were also working to convert the older single-space coin-operated meters to the kiosk, multi-space kiosk that you may be familiar with. The old single-space meters did not record transaction information. So, when the DDA decided to make the investment into the ePark system and to the development of a mobile app, they were thinking about customer experience, but an added benefit is that those systems capture more information. So the ePark installation was completed in October of 2018. So at the end of this month, we'll start to have transaction and revenue data from what we call a full ePark system, and we'll be better able to track changes moving forward. It's also important to note that meter bag rental also impacts meter bag revenue and patron counts. Meter bag rentals fluctuate based on different construction projects or city projects that are happening downtown. In recent months, the DDA board, specifically the operations committee, has been approached by some developments who are seeking to utilize the parking in lieu or contribution in lieu arrangement. I know this is something that I think we talked about last year, maybe at this meeting, and maybe something we want to circle back to again. Transportation updates, we continue to see strong use and really hear from employers that they recognize a real benefit in the Go Pass program. We also continue to see increases in the air ride usage. That's the bus service from downtown to the airport, up about 2,000 trips from last year. The DDA provides discounted parking for air ride users at the 4th and William structure. And this year we continued to add bicycle parking. We converted 1 space at the 4th and Washington parking structure to bike parking and can accommodate about 20 bikes there covered. And also, obviously, the bikeway on William Street.
So, as Phil said, take a temperature read. We want to get back to the Ann and Ashley garage. The garage was considered by the DDA a couple years ago as part of a retreat looking west of Main Street. You heard earlier from Jessica and Molly about the capital improvements project on First and Ashley. The DDA will be investing a couple $1 million in water main expansions, repairing broken sidewalk, resurfacing, doing an extensive amount of infrastructure investment. The Ann and Ashley expansion was considered a part of it because the goal of those water main expansions is the eventual reuse of a lot of surface parking lots west of Main Street for future residences, future hotels, future offices. And the parking that's been provided in that area could be added to the garage, thereby reducing the amount of pressure on those lots to have a public parking or a parking component. The garage was also built in the mid-'80s. It was built before there was concern about things like stormwater or pedestrian improvements. We have an opportunity to go back with a bonded project and make extensive investments in things like the pedestrian exit onto Miller, which is the entrance that faces to the Carytown shops, is not very welcoming. We have a chance to really make it connect better to the farmers market. We have a chance to do other sustainability elements, such as all LED lights inside, doing some more stormwater in the alley adjacent to it, adding bike parking and so forth. But as much as all of that, the big exciting part of this is as we add a new roof, we have the chance to engineer what will be the bracing system, the anchoring system for a future solar array up on the rooftop. We've talked, at least initially, with the Sustainability Office about the size of that solar array. What we do know, however big it is, because you're up in the air, there's enormous wind forces on those carports. So you've got to build into the structure the ability to carry the weight of what those wind loads would be. So that's really the big part of the futures. We're starting with a project that creates the infrastructure for the future solar electric on top. I know the project has been delayed, the decision on the project has been delayed till next week. We have a chance to come back in front of City Council. This is also an opportunity, if there was any questions about the build-out on the ground floor, to share a little bit more about the parking operator office that had been envisioned there, the meeting space, and so forth. But it seemed like a good opportunity to at least describe the project and then maybe allow for a discussion around the project and how it ties in with the other improvements being made west of Main Street. So maybe we'll stop there before we get to some other content.
I guess
Councilmember O'Malley?
I'll break the ice. Thank you for that presentation, Jessica. That was very well understood. When we get to this point about the Ann Ashley parking garage, many members, if I can speak for others other than myself, but maybe I should just speak for myself here, are a little perplexed with the messaging that we're getting with development in the downtown area. We're being told the future is carless. It doesn't require the need. We're trying to get away from an automobile-centric society and culture, especially downtown. But yet we're being asked to approve building 375 more spaces on the garage. So it's a little schizophrenic to understand what the policy we should be adopting is, whether it's going to be necessary for this type of garage, or are we getting away from it because we're simply at a crossroads with I just remember the underground parking garage when it was built was being touted as the last parking garage we were going to need or build. So many new members of council here, and just trying to understand the philosophy and the adaptation of policy.
So I can lead in and maybe offer it up to the DDA members to talk a little bit more. The garage has with it the opportunity to also address beyond the autonomous vehicle future, that conflated Uber and Lyft with autonomous as if everyone is going to give up their car. That idea, by the way, has not yet shown itself to resonate completely, the conflation of Uber and Lyft and autonomous. But the garage, one of the elements I didn't mention is it gives us a chance to add a significant amount more electrical capacity. One of the technologies that's also hot on our heels is electric vehicles. Most of our garages had their genesis before that idea was there, and they don't have the electrical capacity to add any more EVs. I think Library Lane might be among the only ones that has more electric capacity. So we have the opportunity to add at least minimally 20, and we had just started down and haven't finished an analysis on how many more electric vehicles we can add. That certainly is something to think about as we go forward. A lot of the new technologies that maybe doesn't get the same attention is electric mobility as opposed to gas fueled. The second part is this garage has that perfect efficiency for parking, meaning it's an all-sloped garage. There will not be another use on the rooftop, as there will be with some of our other garages. The flat-top garages like 4th and Washington, 4th and William, even Maynard, have opportunities down the road if parking demand were to wane to find a way to reuse that space for other kinds of purposes. And as Jada showed on our slide, the tree line, the 350 South Fifth Avenue lot, formerly known as the old Y lot, the Klein lot, which is currently under examination for affordable housing. We have probably 600 parking spaces in the near vicinity of this garage that will be going away because of commitments that have been made, and likely more. The Klein lot isn't even figured into it. So certainly there are policy implications in this, and you're right to call them out. And I don't know that there is the right answer, but the garage has the ability to be added to. It doesn't have another use on the rooftop. So with this bonding, a chance to electrify our garage so they can hold more electric vehicles is the opportunity. And so I'll leave that there, maybe for more board members to speak.
I just wanted to add that there are hundreds of people on a wait list for a permit in Ann Arbor, and they've been there for years. We have, at this point, no more permits to give. The only permits that we can give a new development, like a hotel coming in, would be a night and weekend pass, you know, from, I think it's 3:00 p.m. until, correct me if I'm wrong, 9:00 a.m. the next day. So we're a development authority. As the way I see it, we're trying to set up things for developers to come in and do new things in Ann Arbor. And if it's a hotel and they need parking, those are the only permits that we can give them. We can't give them a full day permit, so.
And just so that I can understand too, what I hear you saying is that we have 600 some odd city surface parking spots in the downtown. We are able to use that land for other purposes, be it a affordable housing development, a mixed-use development. And so in part, the 375 spaces on top of this structure are envisioned as essentially putting in a deposit on, to offset those anticipated losses when we use that land for other more beneficial purposes.
Yes.
Councilor Lum.
I'm
Oh,
going to allow Jeff.
No, that's all right. If she was on the list, go ahead.
Thanks. First I want to thank you, DDA, for this information from joining us tonight. I think these annual meetings are always helpful and informative, and particularly when we're considering a project like the Ann Ashley structure, so it's very timely. I've come to conclude that I think that project is essential, and obviously a lot has to do with in hearing the DDA's rationale, supply, demand. It's nice to know, Phil, what you've got in terms of a wait list. And then, as the mayor just alluded to, and so did Ms. Polly, the loss of spaces and lost capacity elsewhere in the downtown system that you're looking at. Obviously, I'm certainly no expert, but and I know that you had some futuring questions, like what is the relationship among parking, affordable housing, mixed use, but we seem to be touching on that. So I think the assumption that we seem to be making, which Councilmember Graham-Lowry was alluding to, that folks living downtown don't have cars or need parking, I don't think that's an accurate assumption. I mean, it's certainly true for some, but not for many. I mean, office workers need parking too, so do hotel patrons, retail shopping visitors. So unless the basic mindset changes, from auto-centric to that there's not a need, I don't see parking demand falling. Again, I'm no expert. And I will just add that I think to think Ann Arbor can single-handedly change that mindset, and those behaviors is, I think, naive and risky. I think it's risky to the health of downtown in this case, so.
We got Councilor Griswold and Hayner.
One question I have is, when Core Spaces was going to be built or was being considered, we were told that there was enough parking for Core Spaces in the underground parking structure, I believe. So fast forward to now, and so what you're saying is that we don't need parking now, but we're building for the future, is that correct?
The genesis of the project is about the future. It was not in response to the Core Spaces project.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Hayner?
So, you're asking to bond the taxpayers of Ann Arbor for 23 million at 3.5%, or 28 million by the time we're done paying it back. And essentially, it sounds like the driving force in adding these structures is because we want to do away with requiring private development to pay for their own parking. And so the public is footing the bill for the private benefits. So what are the public benefits of paying for parking when we could simply require developers to do it on their own and develop their own parking on their sites? And I know it adds to the cost of affordable housing, but setting affordable housing aside for the moment, we have a hotel we're talking about on the corner of Huron and Division, requiring no parking. We have all these developments coming forward and this push in planning to say no parking required. So how did the job of providing parking for private development fall to the public?
So, I think Darren?
I can jump in if you like. So, I think I appreciate that point, Jeff. I wanted to point out a couple things. So right now, base zoning for all of downtown, for those that don't know, and we probably all do, D1 or D2. In those zoning districts, there is no minimum parking requirements if you build within the allowable FAR. None. That's today. What comes in place is that the prices that land is trading at requires the purchaser to maximize all possible premiums, which is where the parking requirement comes in on one parking space per 1,000 square foot of FAR area, which is significant for a lot of these larger parcels that are being amassed. I agree with you that it's a dangerous precedent to have the public build parking for a private developer yet to be identified to satisfy their zoning requirements. The way that developers can do that through zoning now is build the parking on site, or they can go through this contribution in lieu program, which comes down to writing a massive check, which I don't believe anyone has ever done, because it's like $50,000 per space, or go talk to the DDA and sign a contract. And that's what every single one of them does. And as Phil pointed out, we don't have any daytime passes, and starting with the project on Southview a couple of years ago, said, well, what we have is night and weekend. And it was determined that having a contract for night and weekend pass satisfied the planning requirement. Well, on South University, when it's all student housing, that makes sense. And in fact, those passes, the developers told us, they don't even get used. They're just sitting in a drawer somewhere. We're paying us $30 a month, which is a pittance. And they were able to build their building and satisfy the zoning requirements. So I think something that you take a look at is, should we continue to allow developers to satisfy their parking requirements if they're using premium floor area by signing a contract with us for something that we don't have and a contract that we as the DDA don't necessarily want to issue? We could either relook at different parts of the downtown, maybe say Southview functions differently than the Main Street area, because it does, and how those parking requirements are looked at in different parts of the downtown. Or, like you're saying, if you want to require developers to build it on site, eliminate their option to come get a contract from us, because that's the easy button, and that's what every single one was going to do.
Yeah, and I think that thanks for that answer, and I think that there is a flaw with that D1, D2 that puts us in this mode here of having to build parking for them. And I wonder if the $52,500 a space or whatever that this works out to for Ann Ashley, because it is an expensive type of construction on this location, if that money wouldn't be better spent and more towards in keeping with our goals of reducing car use in the downtown, if we built lots out at the park, or we built structures out at the park and ride lots on the perimeter and invested in our transit system to run these park and ride shuttles better than we do. And I think that money would go a lot further out there on the perimeter of town, and it would meet both our goals. So I just have concerns about the cost and the idea that it's at odds with our goals of reducing car use downtown, despite the obviousness of the fact that none of this is reducing car use downtown. Car use downtown is as bad as it's ever been. And obviously putting another 400 spots there isn't gonna help. And so I just think it seems like this is at odds, and that's one of the reasons I asked to have it postponed until following this conversation here, because I'm not satisfied that it's working towards our ultimate goals as a city. Those were my big questions.
Thank you. So I have a question, is how this was selected. We have various needs downtown, and currently we have a huge need for parking on the South University area. We hear from landlords that they can't rent out retail space in that area because there's not sufficient parking. So we're apparently going to build for an anticipated need on this side of downtown, whereas we have a current significant need for parking on the other side of downtown. So I was wondering how you juggled the choice there.
So I don't know that I have the date exact, but I believe in 2015, we commissioned a study from Nelson Nygaard, and we had them look at all the quadrants of downtown to understand the parking demand. And frankly, Southview wasn't at the top of the list. It's not unsurprising that no matter where you go, everyone thinks that their section has the most parking need. Many of the patrons in the Southview area in particular are walking, are bicycling, are using other modes of transportation. In that area, the parking wasn't something that was driving a decision for the DDA, also because there's enormous congestion. If you've been on South University and you've sat in line, there's almost no way to get through that area by car. So adding a garage where there was almost no road capacity also didn't seem like a very good use of funds. So for that reason, the Southview area hadn't been considered. In the discussion around the Ann and Ashley, it wasn't driven by a need for parking. Again, the goal of this was to free the grip on those surface lots in that area. There's opportunity to anticipate the future by removing sort of the onus of parking on those lots, which allows them to have more of the higher and better uses. So what drove that dialogue about Ann Ashley started there. Ann and Ashley and Liberty Square were built in the mid-'80s to be added onto. Ann and Ashley has the capacity for 3 extra floors. Liberty Square has the capacity for at least 4 extra floors. What makes Ann and Ashley easier is the Ann and Ashley garage has a double thread structure, so you can get to the higher floors more quickly. Liberty Square has been looked at and set aside a few times because it has the corkscrew design that you have to sit in a queue to go all the way up and finally get there and then all the way down, whereas Ann and Ashley has the capacity without those kind of inconveniences. So there were some structural reasons as well. But it kept coming back to a vision of our downtown in the future that sees something west of Main Street that doesn't exist today. I think some of you have heard there's a dialogue about how to name it. It doesn't really have a name. There's been a dialogue about, is this the Arts District? You know, what is this? It's a place that has enormous potential, and to realize it, the DDA wanted to get out ahead of it with its pedestrian improvements project, certainly to make sure it was more walkable than it was perceived to be in the past. But the garage fit into that idea that we're creating the potential for something that doesn't exist yet to take shape in that section of downtown.
Well, thank you, but I encourage you to reach out to the South University Merchants Association and talk to them about their need for parking. And I think that you'll find a lot of the congestion in that area is actually people looking for parking spaces. If you drive around and around the block looking for that elusive parking space, you're just you add to the already congested traffic. So, but thank you.
One other piece that I'd throw in the mix as you're thinking about zoning regulations and planning moving forward is the geometry of parking structures. For those of you who are familiar with 4th and Washington, it's about as small a parcel as you want to try to build a parking structure on, because you land up going up and up and up, and it's fairly inefficient. So, you know, it is the case that if you have parcels such as the Klein's lot that are very large, they're worth their weight in gold from looking at it. If you consider an underground parking structure, or as developers look at parcels, that's part of the mix too, is how realistic is it to go underground and how far can you go in a certain footprint. So I throw that out to you too to consider as you look forward.
Can I just put in a general parking plug? I get a lot of requests from fellow two-wheelers that they'd like to see scooter and motorcycle parking expanded to all the structures. I think it would be really a great way to improve mobility mix here in the city. Right now, they have it, you know, it's full at Maynard, always. And that's a lot of downtown, you know, residents and people who work there and stuff. And, you know, Fourth and Washington, that'd be great in that area to have one. It just seems like, I'd like to see that in more of the structures. I don't know how you'd work that in, but I think you'd happily give up a car space for 6 motorcycle spaces.
Actually, I tend to agree with you, and I'd push it further to say that I think there are going to be all kinds of electric vehicles moving forward. You know, electric motorcycles, we're seeing scooters already, but I think there'll be other kinds of electric vehicles everywhere. So I would agree with you.
Thank you.
Speaking to the mobility mix, something that I'd love for us to be able to come back to if possible is right now the city planning staff uses a ratio of, and I hope I say this right, 1 parking space for every 4 shared car spaces. So if you're, and I'm looking at Susan to help me on the language on this, but when they're looking for permits, if they say we provide a Maven, that counts as 4 parking spaces, whereas other cities take it as a standard, not 1 to 4, but 1 to 12. So we might actually be making some gains in terms of what we're asking both our own parking system to do and requiring of developers, if we could take another look at that proportion.
What do you mean by you mean if the developer says we want a parking space, but it's for a Maven or a Zip car instead of a traditional parking, you let that count as they paid for 4?
That's a city planning ratio that they use, yes.
Not paid for, installed.
Installed, thank you.
You mean in their own?
Yes.
In their own required parking?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm going to say, Jada, is Jada still here? Do you have the data on the wait lists for the different structures right now?
I don't have the most up-to-date numbers with me. The waits can be substantial. We use the wait list as a record-keeping tool for ourselves to know, who's next in line, where they want to be. So, if we say we have 1,000 people on the wait list, some people are on more than one wait list, or they'll get on the wait list for 2 spots when maybe they don't need to, maybe they just want 1. So it's not an exact tool for demand, but what it can help inform is areas or neighborhoods where we're getting requests. 3-4 years ago, we did start to see more of a request, more demand on the kind of Main Street, west of Main Street, the Ann Ashley neighborhood. Spaces there used to be more plentiful, but the last couple of years that seems to have become more popular area.
With Ann Ashley in particular, I remember we had a thing at the meeting that was shown in. I know that the city and the county take up a lot of spots in there. And so, is that the case for some of I saw it in some of the other structures too, but it wasn't clear who was taking what. I can't remember the total count, but I think the city and the county are the big users of Ann Ashley. Is that correct? Permanent spaces? So those are spaces that are permanently removed from public drive-in use, like anytime use? Okay. No, that's all. I just wanted to make sure I was reading that correctly, because that's an unusual situation there where we're kind of, and that, all of the revenue that comes from those additional spaces being used is going towards paying off these bonds. And that includes the city paying for those spaces, the county paying for those spaces, and so on. That's just going into general parking revenue?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to mention. The parking system is supporting the parking system. So when we talk about this debt issuance, the parking users would be paying for the addition to the parking system through your revenues, through the parking revenues that come to the system. At Ann and Ashley, so if I'm a city worker, my fee is going toward the costs of the garage, or it goes to the whole system. We run it as a full system. And the garages where the debt service is paid off help to support the parts of the system that have new debt. So it's all in that general parking revenue usage to run the system. And again, just to underscore, the parking revenues from the system would be paying for the debt that would be issued, not the taxpayer. Parking users would be paying for that debt.
As long as the garage is functioning properly and people still drive, but if we have no carbon situation in 12 years and nobody's driving anymore, then we're stuck with that debt load. I know that seems odd,
Yeah,
but.
the majority of the system has no debt. Liberty Square was built in the early 80s, as was Ann Ashley. We have some debt that has been rolling off when we did repairs to the garages. Some of it was bonded earlier. Fortunately, as the demand, if it were to wane, I would imagine that we would be releasing parking lots as an alternative. We would be releasing the rooftop of the garages, but also we're fortunate that our system is self-supporting and including funds to the city, as mentioned, you know, $4.5 million to the city to help fund general city services. The city system is fairly robust with a relatively small amount of debt.
Have the costs for Republic escalated over the years? Did their costs for using them as our parking management provider gone up? Are they pretty steady, or? Just curious.
So, we, 3 years ago, rebid the parking operator contract.
Microphone.
And
We can hear you, it's for folks at home.
okay, thank you for that. Thank you. 3 years ago, we bid out the parking operator contract. It actually, they came in lower than they were. So Republic Parking is paid $125,000 a year management fee, and they can earn up to $50,000 as an incentive fee. All of the operating costs are reimbursed by the DDA. So the money that they're making is the 125 plus the 50.
Councilmember Lamley, you can grab.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground over those last 15, 20 minutes. Appreciate all the back and forth. I do have a few different topics here. I wanted to touch on the wait list. It's been a troubling matter for many years. It doesn't seem to be transparent. Leads us to question motives, the needs, purpose. Frankly, it's a moving target. I think by now in almost 2020, we'd have a better system of tracking it, knowing where those demands are. It's frankly not a comfortable response that we get as a council member, where the demand is. From what I'm hearing, we're talking about future needs, but also current demand and shortage. And I would really like to see those books opened up. I like to see more transparency and more light put on it. I think it's necessary to make these kind of decisions. I just frankly am not comfortable making decisions on this, what with all due respect, hocus pocus. It really needs to be more clear, and I apologize, but there frankly needs to be more transparency on that wait list and where the needs are. And frankly, I'll just leave it at that, and we can pick up on it a later time, because I wanted to move to a couple other things. The whole philosophy of the cost of the system, revenues, charging, the rates. As I looked at our rate structure there, and if is it okay to migrate to that, perhaps?
Sure.
Sorry. Where the metered rates keep going up, and by 2022, it's going to be $2.20 an hour, which rivals cities like Chicago and New York. But the structured rates continue to go like this. Is that funny?
Well, it's incorrect.
Incorrect.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess so. The structured rates continue to go flat. No increase, even over 4 years. On all the type of some of the permits go up a little bit, but maybe at the rate of inflation. But we talk about the cost to maintain the system. How much cost is in there in maintaining those on-street parking spaces versus the cost and maintenance of those parking garages? And are we shifting, and are we taking the money from one part of the system to help support the other part of the system? I mean, I assume money's fungible. It all goes into the same account. And I'm not sure if there's a way to really analyze it, to know whether, are we charging enough in those structures? And are we charging too much on the streets? Because I feel those on-street rates are exceedingly high, and the structure rates are inducing visitors. I mean, if I had a permit, I had a guaranteed spot, I would make as many trips downtown in a car as I would. What would, it's not costing me any more. So again, for me, I have a problem putting these two things together. And I'm not saying the work that's being done is bad, but it's just, for me, it's inconsistent. The people that park on the streets are the ones going in and getting coffee, going to the doing yoga, picking up something. Those are the people that come downtown to help support small businesses. And we are the unintended consequences, I think, are there. And I want to bring that up. I really do think it's an issue that needs to be addressed. And going further, I would like to see, I'll pay more attention to the analysis of the cost of those things, and because again, on-street parking, how much is it really costing to do that maintenance? I think a lot of it's done with Act 51 money and all that kind of stuff. Parking garages, they require a lot of maintenance.
So if I could just sort of respond just with information in the presentation earlier, we spoke to the logic behind the rate changes. The garages and the meters are not separated. It's one parking system. And the goal of these rate changes over time is using what's called a demand management approach, similar to an airport, where an airport charges the most for the closest in spaces as a way to encourage you to think about options that push you out, for instance, to the shuttle lot. The garages and the meters and the lots are all working together to give you options, but the ones that are the most convenient, everyone would want that curb, just as we all would like the curb at the airport. To encourage you to park off-street, the rates are scheduled in a way that the differential over time to park on-street and off-street should grow so that there's an incentive to park off-street where it's less convenient. The monthly rates are increasing $10 a month each year to raise the rates for that to such a point that paying by the hour versus paying by the permit, now there's an incentive not to buy the permit, because in fact, that's one of the goals of the permit is you can save money. And we're going to be growing the rates for the permit so that we take away that pressure. That's partly why we have that wait list, is because we've been incentivizing people with a discounted monthly permit rate. So the goal using demand management is using price and convenience together to give people choices where one might not be as convenient, where one might be less expensive. You can choose those choices that work just as you do at an airport.
I appreciate that explanation. In fact, I just got back from Mexico, and I can tell you downtown Ann Arbor is not an airport. And frankly, we probably need to pursue it, looking at it a little differently.
Councilor Lund. Sorry, Councilor Graham Lumnack.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation of the parking and very supportive of wanting to encourage turnover in those metered spaces, so that I think that's one of the other things that it's intended to do. I do want to go back to just one of the struggles that I have with the parking structure expansion, which really isn't about the analysis of from the GDA side, but I know something that one of my colleagues has brought up before is that it's really predicated on this assumption that we will use those surface lots for higher and better use. And we've yet to receive that the analysis of how we can use some of these spaces for priorities like affordable housing and some of the struggles that we've had as a council to approve certain kinds of development. I do want to just throw that out there that I'm certainly leaning towards supporting this, because I do want to believe in that process that we will use those surface lots in the not so distant future for that use. But it really I just want to acknowledge that you're really putting your trust in us as a body of being and the community in terms of being able to work towards a process where we can build that hopefully housing on at least some of those surface lots, because we do really hear from so many members of the community that it is a priority, but I do want to acknowledge that it's a priority that's not without its challenges, and it really does put a lot of trust in the council to help get that done.
Councilor Lowe.
Yeah.
Councilor Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I struggle with this, and I've really only one question, but then just kind of want to bare my soul and lay out where I stand right now, and then get information as people think it's appropriate. But I guess the first question that really is an anchor for my other thoughts is, of the parking fund dollars that come to the city, where do those dollars go? Is that general fund?
Yes.
Are there strings attached?
No.
Okay. So, I don't know, there are 4 arguments for the Ann Ashley structure construction, as I've heard them. There's the electrification to be prepared for EV. There's parking demand today. There's a wait list that's getting unmanageable. Our zoning code requires developers to build parking, and when they can't do that on site or don't want to do that on site, this is a release valve for them to have opportunity to construct downtown. And then finally, it frees up opportunity on surface lots. Those are kind of like the 4 that I'm hearing. And then I'm just wondering, like, is this the right solution for each of those 4? Or do we have a solution that we've been seeking legitimate issues to attach to it? And in response to the electric vehicle, item, if the climate crisis is what we all believe it to be, and we need to transition to EV and be a leader in that and enable that, I mean, should we just be bonding out to do EV in our structures to begin with? When it comes to the parking demand today, do we want to be responding to that demand with more supply, or do we want to aggressively increase rates to manage that, and then maybe pay out more to the city's general fund so that we can be paving streets in local neighborhoods, that we can be paying for parks in neighborhoods and not increasing the amount of car congestion and traffic and emissions that we're getting downtown, or send those dollars to the affordable housing piece of our general fund, right? For the permits and development, I'm one representative, but I don't think we should be requiring developers to have parking in development downtown, period. And while I don't think that there's political will to do that today, I think there will be in 10 years. And a parking structure is a 75-year investment. And if we're gonna have a policy solution for something, within the next decade, why try to solve it with an infrastructure that I think is gonna be outdated to meet the demands of our zoning code, which is already outdated. And then finally, the one that is appealing to me is the surface lot opportunity, because we just have so many surface lots downtown, and they could be so much more. And that's exciting to me, but again, is this the solution? Because if we get these 370 parking spaces freed up and centralized into one structure that already exists today, is already parking structure today, that's great. But our zoning code is going to require any development that goes on in those surface parking lots to have more parking anyways. And so where is that increased parking going to go? Is it going to permit back out to Ann Ashley? Are we going to require them to build it? And I think these are 4 articulated, really legitimate problems that we face as a downtown and as a community. But I have a hard time figuring out how this is the solution to each of those 4. So that's me bearing my soul and how I see this. I think we have some progressive action we could take on our zoning code, on parking rates to solve these things. I don't know if built infrastructure is the solution that we wanted to.
In response to that?
No, just put me on the list.
Captain Smith, go up.
What's up?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's our corner over here.
Yeah.
Go ahead, guys, I'll defer to that.
No, go ahead. No.
So I'll put a little bit harder edge on, excuse me, on what Zach said, which is, you know, if we're really serious about climate change, and clearly, you know, there is a climate emergency, and carbon is the enemy in all of this, you know, I don't see how encouraging people to drive downtown solves our problem at all. I think, you know, I've said this before, and I'm going to continue saying it for the next year, is, you know, as we deal with this environmental catastrophe, it's going to require sacrifice, and that means that I don't get to drive and park for cheap right in front of the store I want to go to downtown. And I think we have to be prepared to talk to our constituents and say, yeah, you know, this is one of the sacrifices that we have to make. You know, I look at our city, and the thing that, when people talk to me, and when I talk to people, whether it's about housing, whether it's about climate, whether it's about the environment, you know, what it comes down to is what are we planning our cities for? Are we planning them for people and for their quality of life and their enjoyment, or are we planning them for cars? And cars being the only way that we can envision getting around the city. And I think, and I've had this discussion, I know with you, Susan, and with lots of members of the DDA, is that, you know, my position is, you know, it's time to make some hard calls on this. And yeah, everybody wants to drive and pull right up and pay, you know, 50 cents an hour to park at the curb all day downtown. But I don't think that's what we want. When people say, you know, I want a pedestrian-centric downtown, well, cars are the enemy of a pedestrian-centric district, and we're talking about how do we bring more cars in there. So I think we have to ask ourselves, you know, some hard questions, and, you know, understand that there are going to be impacts to lots of different people in making this decision. So, you know, I think I have a great deal of concern about our willingness to make these hard decisions and to sacrifice. And, you know, if we want to talk about being in the leading edge of you know, getting to carbon neutrality by 2025, you know, we can't consider a future like this. We have to think about something very radically different. And, you know, I just think building more parking garages doesn't accomplish that.
John?
I was just going to add a detailed thing about the on-street parking. Because one of the things that we've talked about is the notion of graduated pricing for on-street parking. One of the challenges downtown is that, and I don't remember the statistics, somebody else may, but a lot of employees historically had parked in metered parking spaces. And what we heard from a lot of businesses was that they'd like those spaces available for their customers. So part of the idea is, you know, trying to free up on-street parking in key zones. So one thing that we've talked about is the possibility moving forward to sort of graduate on-street parking pricing. So there's, you know, there's a fairly complicated mix of how to accommodate everyone, but I just want to go back and quick address that piece. One other piece, just as for information's sake too, is we've talked about the idea of parking structures downtown, is that looking forward, if there is the time when we can do with less vehicles, Fourth and William would be a good opportunity to replace that structure with downtown development, whether it's associated with AETA or with something else and better. So those are a couple elements I just want to throw out to folks, keep in mind.
So I think some insight into how a lot of us think is, so I think from a, Chip, to your point, like I think from a policy / the future of Ann Arbor, I mean, I think that's for city council to elected officials to determine and push forward. We were looking at it, or I think we were looking at it more from a midterm math problem. And how do we affect change gradually without putting major stress on parking system and constituents downtown? Straight up, you know, people that are buying, shopping, working, visiting. And so with the potential from a midterm math problem of losing X amount of spots, but not wanting to replace all of them, and doing it for the most efficient, cost-effective way possible, with the options that are allowed in the areas that have potential, it is what I would say is the most prudent way to hedge and add something to the system without adding too much, adding it in the cheapest. From what I understand, if I'm recalling correctly, from a cost per parking space perspective, this was the most effective way to do it. It wasn't adding the full 600, it wasn't adding more parking, it wasn't building a new structure. We had a lot of the same conversations when we went through this whole exercise about autonomous vehicles and restriping parking structures, and like, did we even need, and we went through the full gamut. And you know, if we were all going to put some money on the table and say, are we all going to be driving, our cars going to be driving us in 10 years, or are we going to still need the exact same number of parking spots in 10 years? I mean, that's the game we're playing right now. So I think that if it is a hard line, if it is a carbon neutral standpoint, if we want to make that change, that's a directive from City Council. If it's what are you going to do about parking downtown, and it's potentially going to be a problem in 5 or 10 years, that's what we were trying to address. So I think split the two issues apart to some degree, and in terms of whether Ann Ashley is a good choice for the next 10 to 15 years, because the bond payment will be 20 or 25 years, something like that. So it is likely not us talking about what our kids are going to be doing. This is like a 10 or 15-year issue. So that's what I put out. We just take it from I personally take it as a math problem and trying to solve the math problem in the least harsh way possible.
I've got Griswold or Malawi or Lum, and then perhaps move on to future.
When I have these meetings with the DDA, or when I've observed them in the past, I always feel like I've moved into a parallel universe. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that as a council member and as an advocate in the past, I was concerned about the city's concerns, all of the city. And I think now we're concerned about the world and whether it's going to even exist in 20, 30 years. And so our perspective on life is different. And the first thing I want to mention is demand management. The DDA talks about moving cars from on-street into the parking structures, which is a valid initiative. But if I'm someone who's thinking about, do I want to go out to a restaurant tonight? Do I want to park somewhere, go to a restaurant where I can park within a block? Then maybe I'll choose the restaurant that's out at a shopping center that's not downtown. And so I think that needs to be considered in your calculation. So it's not just moving the cars to the parking structure, but it's also realizing that your universe is bigger and it includes those people who are going to decide, am I even going to go downtown or not? And the other thing is, I'm trying to have guiding principles on all of my decisions, and Vision Zero is one of them, sustainability is one of them, and I cannot say, okay, I'm going to focus on sustainability Monday through Friday, Vision Zero on Saturday, but on Sunday, throw that all out, and yeah, a lot of parking sounds good downtown because we might need it in the future. So it just, and maybe I should apologize on behalf of the council, even though I've only been here for a year, that we didn't give good direction, but we do have a major sustainability initiative that we take very seriously. We do have a Vision Zero goal that we're taking very seriously, and so more parking on the outskirts of town would make a lot more sense, and I realize that's not the DDA's area, but I wish there was a way that you could do park and ride lots with your DDA resources. Thanks.
Councilor Romali.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor, and thank you for the extra opportunity to speak. I just wanted to talk again about the employee parking on the streets. It's an issue that happens at nighttime mostly. It's an issue I think that does not exist to the level that it's been prescribed to exist at. There has been the program for $30 monthly rates in the parking garages after 3 p.m. and that has helped greatly. It's appreciated that program exists and helps to alleviate that issue and concern. So, you know, my issue with the price of parking is that we're not being fair. We're not assessing the true cost of parking for those folks that use those structures. And we're putting too much of a burden on the ones that are using the streets. And those street parking is essential for small business owners. I am one. I've been there for over 30 years. Acknowledge my existence. Acknowledge the existence of other small business owners. I know many, and I can tell you, they support me, and they support what I'm saying right now. And we can't keep choking them off, and just acknowledge that. And I'm sorry that it does affect the small business owners downtown that are struggling with so many other issues. And the perception of paying that much to park on the street factors into people's decisions on whether they're going to come to downtown and use what we have to offer. So I just want to just reiterate that point one last time, and I apologize for taking too much of everyone's time tonight, but that's where I'm going with that issue.
Sure. Let's see. I largely wanted to say, with Rishi on this all the way, that, you know, what we looked at was that on this particular spot was that we thought it would be the cheapest and fastest way, since it was designed to have the additional layers put on it. It has not been either as cheap as we thought or as fast as we thought, but it is still the cheapest and fastest option. So, that's why we went with that particular location more than any other. I'm also with him entirely on this point about how we were looking at it in terms of what we manage and what we can manage. And in many ways, I'm with you, Chip, in terms of, you know, if this is inappropriate for the guidelines from City Council, that's okay too. We just have to know it, right? And there has to be some certainty to this, because what that is saying is that there is a finite number of parking spots that we will ever have downtown. Because this is the cheapest and fastest way to add more parking. So if we don't want to do it, what we're essentially saying is what we have now is our parking inventory. And that may be okay, but we have to acknowledge that that is what that decision says. You know, and if that's the case, then we move forward. And I've heard a lot about, you know, making things pedestrian-centric, and of course that's something we've done a lot with. This is what pretty much every one of these streetscapes we've been working on has been about, is making it more pedestrian-centric. And, you know, we will continue to do that. We don't need necessarily the parking structure to do that. But if we want to be able to provide parking, whether it's for future development or for replacing the spots that we lose, and some of them aren't just hypothetical. You know, I mean, we know something's going to happen with 415 West Washington. We are going to lose those as parking spots. So, do we want to replace them or not? And that's the question that City Council is going to have to decide, and we can give you as much information as, you know, we can, but ultimately that's a policy decision. And I just wanted to make one small point about that, looking to get in front of that restaurant. And that is, and I know we have disagreements on this, but I too had, until June 1st, a restaurant downtown. The whole concept of transportation demand management is that the space is available for you because of at an ideal pricing, there will be enough turnover in that spot. And if it's too cheap, there'll be no turnover because whoever gets that will hang on to it forever. So the whole point of the higher pricing is to make it a higher turnover spot so that you can have a little more possibility, and I think this is true, of finding that spot downtown. given the limited inventory we have. So that's all I had to say.
I want to move on to the future, but I do have a cue to run out, and there are also some DDA members who haven't said much today, and so I want to give them the opportunity. So if we can, Lon McFarland McCain up, and then move on to the next portion of the conversation.
Okay, I'll be real quick. Just to the long-term policy question that council will be setting, I would I don't think it can be emphasized strongly enough how important it is to reach out to the Rishis and the Councilmember Mlawis and others who have businesses downtown, the office tenants, all the folks who live and work downtown, and to get their input on, what it takes to get them to locate downtown. And I think that that's critical, and I'm delighted that both Rishi and now that you're here, Ally, that's because we need that kind of input. As you know, short term, I do think this expansion project is essential. And I think we should also always be cognizant of the fact that when we defer addressing a parking need with any given development, oftentimes the parking burden does transfer to the adjacent neighborhoods. And we know it's happening in and around the downtown area. And we're now hearing from, I know the First Ward Council members in particular are hearing from folks who are moving into some of these developments. And whenever proposals come along, like the U of M hospital expansion, this hotel, a proposal to remove on-street parking, the tree line, on and on, that are taking spots out of the system. Those cars still, they don't just vanish, and often the neighborhoods are burdened. And anyway, and thank you again for explaining the rationale to us. I think it's good that we postponed this decision so we could have this conversation for adding this additional parking capacity.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sorry. One quick thing, only because I work right next door to Jerusalem Gardens, so it's a problem that's near and dear to my heart too, parking. But I walk there every morning or when I can, and what I see is the street is pretty much always full, right? There's on-street parking is always full. In fact, when we have guests that are coming to visit us, we have to address them or ask them to go to different lots, because you can't think that there's going to be parking right on Liberty. So the idea, if it was an easy solve to say, let's reduce the hourly rate on those meters, and it meant that more people could come in, more people could visit me, more people could visit you, I think that would be something that we would talk about 100%. So the idea that we would do anything that would make it harder for people to go to businesses is just not in our DNA. It's not what we talk about during our meetings. Just wanted to clarify that. Sorry, before I started daydreaming about what's going on. Thanks.
I know we spent a lot of time on this, and everybody has strong opinions, but I do want to get to affordable housing, because I think that's the most important thing for this group to talk about. But I'm also strongly in support of this project, and I want to encourage those at the table that are on council that get to vote on this, that we're trying to, like Rishi, I agree strongly with Rishi, we're trying to fix an immediate problem. There's a lot of talk about the future and what's going to happen with cars and all this, and that's great, and we all like to sit and pontificate, but the reality is we have an actual problem today, and this is the most cost-effective, efficient way to get that done as soon as possible, which is, as Keith said, not very soon. But even to the point that Chip made about sustainability and resilience, something that Howard brought up, if you want to have sustainable growth, I meet with people every day that I'm trying to lure to get their offices and businesses downtown Ann Arbor, and every single person says, where are my people going to park? We don't have a regional transit system. People don't just come from Burns Park and Arbor Hills and the Old West Side. They come from Troy, and they come from Dearborn. They are driving their personal cars. They're not taking the Amtrak that runs twice a day. They need to come all the way to their job where they can get out and then walk to their place from there. And without single occupant vehicle parking, that's our choice today, because we live in the Motor City or suburb of. So from a sustainability, if you want to sustain growth, we need to provide the parking that's there in order for people like myself to lure new tech companies to come to town. Or they will go to the suburbs, to at least Briarwood. And that leads to my next point. People that come downtown, whether it is to shop or rent office space or whatever, they have a different level of price sensitivity. If you are more concerned with the cheapest, if you want the cheapest falafel, you're not gonna go to Jerusalem Garden. You're gonna go down by Briarwood where you can get it cheaper, and I'm not sure there's a place down there that's any good. But point being is that I go to Jerusalem Garden because I know it's the best, and I know I'm gonna pay a little bit more for it. And I'm fortunate to not have to look for parking when I go there, but I don't think that the average consumer, whether it's for falafel or t-shirts or wherever they're going, that they're coming downtown because they're looking for a deal. Those people are going out on Jackson Road or Washtenaw. So I just encourage everybody to, if you see it in your heart that this is a good solution for the short term, please approve this project, and I look forward to a discussion on affordable housing tonight.
My last comment is back to the math problem. The number of spaces that are being added at Ann and Ashley does not match the number of spaces that we will lose with the developments that we're talking about doing on surface lots. So if you're talking about moving towards sustainability, I believe that this move will get us there in the next 5 to 10 years.
Segue to.
So,
Only if
we
Missy doesn't
have
count all the
assembled
carbon
a
in
set
that
of
concrete.
questions that came from a variety
the
of
least-
sources. No particular one needs to be the one that's at the top of the list, but that just rolled up that way. So we've put these questions there to sort of trigger conversation. We don't have a particular goal in mind. Maybe I'll allow our administrator to maybe add to what I'm saying. It's an opportunity of discussion.
So we know in the future the role of the DDA will change, and we've talked about them taking on service provider responsibilities like overseeing our events planning and execution, solid waste management, and those kind of services as we look to the future. How do we want to use the right-of-way in the future? It's tied a little bit to the parking discussion and to our concern about making it a pedestrian and bicycle friendly environment. But there's only so much space in the public right-of-way. How are we going to allocate that? I think we've already seen the conflicts that arise when people on scooters going 15 miles an hour encounter people walking down the street at 3 miles per hour, and there are conflicts there. So what do we want to do? What's the best use for the limited real estate that we have? And then finally, what other projects should DDA be pursuing? We talked about parking garage, we talked about people-friendly streets. What else is there that they can be an effective agent for design, construction, and development as we look beyond the immediate horizon and the short-term math problem that we just talked about?
I'm sorry? Just raise your hand and start talking. Councilor Hayner.
I have a financial trend question. How much of the $309 million in debt that we service to the tune of $8 to $9 million a year is a result of downtown investment versus the rest of the city investment? Because this Ann Ashley structure would add to that percentage. So we've gone from $100-some million in debt to over $300 million in the last 10 or 15 years, and a good deal of that is downtown, right? So the $50 million going to be $65 million for the library lot. That's debt that the city services, right? City and DDA, we're all the same people here.
Parking system services.
Well, it's still debt on the taxpayers. So I'm just curious, do we have a breakout of how much of that total debt that the city has is downtown centric?
I'm sure Mr. Crawford can provide
Okay.
that before you deliberate on the parking garage next week.
Well, okay, yeah, maybe I should ask that as a question. It's just, we just wonder how this trend is going, and I know that everybody says that the downtown serves everybody, but there's people who don't go downtown at all, don't care about downtown,
Susan, one of the questions that always comes up is what's the limit on the TIF capture and how much money do you know how much money is turned over beyond that cap back to the ratepayer or to the
I think it was about
tax?
$900,000 beyond the cap was received by the other taxing authorities, and it's going to continue to grow. The DDA is capped at 3.5%, and the growth has been in excess of that. We can get that also from Tom. and the projection going forward.
And then in 2017, we negotiated change to the parking agreement to increase the city's share of the parking revenues from 17 to 20%. And that certainly helped with the general fund and the funds that go to the kind of improvements that are of concern to our elected officials also.
I guess you're getting to my point, which is that we've made these investments in the downtown, and at some point, those investments have to kind of pay back. And so I know that the parking agreement restructuring helped with that. I just wonder, as we look at the DDA's use in the future, you know, what are the benefits going to be? Is the downtown, I mean, I'm hard pressed to look at the original Enabling Act before it was just modified and look at our downtown and say that it's struggling in any way. And so I know that's why the DDA is, or I assume that's why DDA is kind of revisiting its goals for the city and its purpose and use to the city. And we talk about, now you're switching over, you're doing projects about pedestrian-friendly streets, and that has nothing to do with downtown growth necessarily. And so I just wonder, you know, we're talking about the future here. What is the future purpose going to be? You know, I mean, I saw when I was in your offices for a solid waste meeting, I saw that now it says that it's to encourage private investment in the city. And so that's sort of an economic development role. And that's not exactly in keeping with the chartered use. So I just want to throw that out there, that this idea that, you know, what are the goals of the DDA in the future, and what's the relationship with the city? Because the downtown isn't struggling.
Yeah, there are benefits, and I know I don't want to interrupt, but there are benefits to having a degree of separation from the parking operation from the city's general revenues. Other cities have seen that as a cash cow that gets raided, and you don't wind up with a parking system that is in good shape and is without debt. So there is a word of caution about the benefit of keeping that a little bit at arm's length. You know, having a vibrant downtown also keeps our property tax base stable, and there, in addition to TIF capture, it also generates other opportunities. So it's really, the visioning is what is the best use for this structure going forward, and that really is a policy decision for all of you to debate. It's good to have it now before we are up against a deadline on it, and that's why we raised it.
Councilmember Romlawi?
Thank you. I remember at the last meeting, there was talk about the future of the DDA and kind of touching on what my colleague had just spoken about. The conditions when the DDA was created are far different than the conditions we see today. But, you know, but I will differ from my colleague that the downtown is struggling in some senses. It may have a lot of people and businesses. A lot of them turn over. A lot of them are gone. When it comes to the independent retailers especially. And we have a more homogeneous downtown in many senses. So I think, although we don't see it now, but there may be an issue, a larger issue looming. And I would like to see us have a more mixed character in the downtown. So it's not just folks that have inventory that changes like a CVS, or places that sell alcohol and dispensaries and salons with expensive makeup and massages. I mean, those are the folks that are the ones that can pay the $60 a square foot that's being asked right now. So you're right, people are not coming downtown to buy the cheapest falafel. They're downtown because they're there for something else. They're there for work. It's a captive market, especially in the daytime. It's a very captive market. People are not driving downtown to get lunch. They go to lunch because they are already downtown for some other reason. So I'm not trying to lower parking rates so I can sell a few more sandwiches. If people knew what my business was these days, they would know that. But I wanted to talk about is how the DDA, what the role is in the future, and that's more of the software application. rather than some of the hardware, as the structure, the system was failing when the DDA took over the parking garages, and I want to see more focus on maintenance on those structures, more streetscaping, obviously the affordable housing issue they can help with, especially so with some of the properties of the Y lot. But also, you know, we talk about Vision Zero, pedestrian safety. I like to see our crosswalks in better condition. I noticed today, driving into work, that the crosswalk on the east side of Liberty was repaved, just the one section where people walk. I was like, wow, hallelujah. People can walk across this busy intersection without tripping and hurting themselves. People that are in canes and walkers and people with disabilities, it's just very dangerous sometimes. So I would like to see our downtown, again, if we could shed some more light on the user's experience when they come downtown, that there's no litter in the alleyways and the crosswalks are clean and safe to travel. That kind of thing. And I know we're running late, so I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Councilor Lowe.
So that segues to the first bullet. I think you were speaking to that, Councilman Remlawi, the DDA's role as a service provider and development partner. I would just refer to the first bullet on the parking principles slide, slide 21. I think it's spot on. The goal is vibrancy and prosperity. And I think with that as the goal, and I absolutely agree it should be, I think the DDA's role becomes more clear, and it should be to focus on ensuring a supportive, infrastructure. I think I would define that as, adequate parking with lighting, accessibility, an attractive environment. It's inviting, it's safe, clean, attractive streetscapes, alleys, all of that. I don't think that the DDA's role is to set policy per se, because I think that's the elected official's role, and where there is accountability for the results and the decisions that are made. I'm also skeptical when it comes to development. I get concerned whenever the city gets into the development business. And I have similar concerns, and I'm similarly skeptical, when there's any direct DDA involvement in development. And I'll just speak to the last bullet, second to last, should we increase the hours of enforcement for on-street parking? 'Cause, we've been touching on this whole, revenue question. I frankly don't think so. I think that, I think the DDA has a lot of money, and if more enforcement depends on the purpose, I would say, and if the purpose is just to raise more money, I don't think it's necessary. I think free parking is sometimes a nice surprise and delight for folks who come downtown. But if the purpose is to turn over spaces in high demand times and areas, that's certainly different. But I don't see any reason why Sunday shouldn't continue to be free. I think that's good for downtown.
I actually, in kind of the conversation about is downtown struggling, I think Councilman Remlawi said it pretty well, which is that it's not struggling, but there are some focal points that we're looking at in terms of diversity of the downtown, both obviously in people, but also in the mix of businesses and types of businesses there are, trying not to make it super homogenous, not just in the a chain aspect, but just in so when you experience downtown, it's a great experience. So actually, where I think I differ from a lot of DDA colleagues is I agree with Councilmember Lum about not increasing hours of enforcement for kind of, I think, the point that Ali was saying, which is focusing on the experience of the small business owner as well as the person that's coming downtown. That idea of having a point where parking isn't free. So you have an on meter, and it's raising, but you have this time where you don't have to pay. You have a Sunday. There are these carrots that we dangle, and I think that, look, it's not going to happen forever where it ends at 6 o'clock, but I think as long as we can prolong it, that's the question. So I've actually pushed, Susan will tell you this firsthand, I've pushed that, before we do something like that, we really need to know that we have to do it. It has to be the last resort. I think for a lot of businesses downtown, it has to be the last resort. I don't know that the extra 10 cents is the thing, but I do think that the opportunity for free parking at 6 p.m. is a big factor. And so I feel more strongly about that than the rate increase. But I think it's just the general concern. Like Molly said, I think we do have a lot of conversations about the viability of small businesses, especially diverse, especially with the struggles that people feel from online and outside of downtown. So, that's that.
Yeah, indeed. To piggyback on both of those, it seems on the face of it like a very successful downtown right now, but it's also a very fragile economy. It doesn't take much, and especially in that mix. Retail is difficult in downtown, and Council Member Rumlawi mentioned the people of being, downtown to work, and that's certainly the daytime economy. And I think that's one of the other things we have to recognize is they're the two different economies. There's a daytime and an evening economy, and they're very different. And the evening economy really is about people coming down for the experience of downtown, and that's why I would say that things like the pedestrian infrastructures really do have a lot to do with downtown, not just anywhere, because that's part of what's creating that experience. So I think we have to keep those things in mind. As far as on-street hours, I think there are more important things to discuss, but as long as it's been brought up a couple of times, this goes back to that demand management. And so part of it is, what's the reality of free parking? When I go downtown on Tuesday nights to the Michigan Theater, I can cruise around the street and there's nothing open. So I end up parking in the structure anyway. And limping down. Thank you, Chip. Oh, excellent. So, the reality is that it isn't free parking, and the reason that those aren't available is because those are the free spots, and there is no time limit on them. If someone grabs them, they're not, that's what they're looking for. They're going to hold on to them. They don't turn over. So, and that's obviously the argument for it. I don't think tonight is where we're going to be making that policy decision, however. But I just wanted to mention that I do think that on-street experience is a big part of what the DDA is about. And actually, the mission statement you mentioned, that's been up there as long as you said, right. So that's not a new mission statement. That's been there since the beginning.
I appreciated Councilmember Hayner's comment a few minutes ago about, what are we here to do? What the DDA is executing right now is an evolution from the original charter, and I think that's an excellent point. And to me, that kind of begs the question, what problems are we here to solve? So if I think about why the DDA was chartered in the first place, and not just here, but in Michigan and across the United States, what we were seeing in the 1960s was a massive disinvestment in our cities. And yes, we have entered the Wayback Machine. I won't stay in the history mode too long, but just to give us a little bit of context for where we are. In the 1960s and 1970s, we saw massive disinvestment in our cities. We saw more crime. We saw an evacuation of businesses large and small to places like Briarwood Mall, which, great that it increased investment and vibrancy in those areas. But what it meant was that the area of density, the area where, I don't remember who it was who kind of said it was a captive audience, there was no captive audience anymore. It was a bit of a ghost town. And so DDAs were conceived of as a vehicle for reimagining what a vibrant area a downtown could be when it came to transit, when it came to housing, when it came to safety and solid waste. And so rather than trying to make the downtown, which in its density has a number of unique both opportunities and challenges, rather than trying to make that the purview of the entire city, DDAs were conceived of as the vehicle to really view those problems and begin to address them. We no longer have the problem of disinvestment. We no longer have the problem of people not wanting to be here, but we have new problems. And I'm really interested. I think now is an incredible inflection point and opportunity, not just in Ann Arbor. You can look at any city across the United States. The thriving cities, the growing cities, the ones that folks are moving to, are struggling with the same things. We're struggling with affordability. We're struggling with diversity. We're struggling with the tenacity of small businesses to be able to hold on, although small businesses are bits and pieces starting to come back downtown. So to get back to your question, Councilman Hayner, I'm interested in all of these questions, and if anybody wants to go out for drinks after, we can talk about this and 11 things more. But when it comes to the problems that we're here to solve, I think that we'd agree the climate crisis is one, and how can we as a DDA and as a city begin to address the climate crisis. An equity crisis, especially as Ann Arbor, as a community within Washtenaw County and within Michigan, is another. Those are two crises that it would be great for us as a DDA and a city to kind of come at our community as joint partners. And beyond crises, we have opportunities. We have opportunities for art. We have opportunities for better basic services. We have many opportunities for small business support. And a lot of times the approaches to the crises start to get at the approaches for the opportunities. So I just kind of wanted to reiterate, I agree. I'm not totally sure why we're here. But I think now's the time to ask and answer that question.
Yeah, it's like a job interview question, like.
Totally.
I think some of these crises are of our own making. As we push to raise the TIF envelope and things like that, we've pushed for development, we've pushed for large development. D1, D2 has created these parking issues, along with helping with the TIF slice. And it seems like it's kind of some of this is kind of a problem of our own making. Mm-hmm. Now we're struggling with our own success, you might say, especially with the equity issues downtown.
And so the question is, what is the next step?
Yeah, but a job interview question would be, what would you say is the number one benefit of the DDA to the general welfare of the city?
What would you say?
I couldn't tell you, because I hear a lot about parking, but then there's that, it's sort of like, if your only tool is a parking space, everything looks like a car, and Chip's pointed out that that's not the direction we want to go, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's, and I know that you're into kind of future planning things, and that, I side with the folks who say that best real estate is being taken up by parking structures.
Well, I hear what you're saying about parking, but we also actively engage our capital improvement projects, right? So the city's first two-way bike lane is a DDA project, and I'm very excited about that. We do actively manage streetscaping, and there's always opportunity for more, but there is that. You mentioned earlier the opportunities for better micromobility, parking and access. There's absolutely those things. But those are new problems, right? Like 2 years ago, we didn't have to think about what to do with birds, or what do we have now? Spins. But this is a new thing. So some of these are problems of our own making, and some of these are just cities are evolving, and how do we evolve with them?
Got Grand Rum Lolly, and then perhaps Eaton, and then call it a day.
Thank you. I know we're getting to public comment time, so I just want to actually compliment the mayor on doing a really amazing job at appointing these DDA members. We're really fortunate to have you all as a group. I do want to speak to just a few things that I hear from residents about their priorities for the downtown and where I think the DDA fits into those. What I hear time and time again about businesses is, why don't we have a grocery store in the downtown? Why don't we have this in the downtown? I remember that we used to have this in the downtown, and my answers, speaks to what I know Darren was hoping to talk about, which is how we can work together to build more housing so that we can have that kind of infrastructure, so that we have the downtown population to support that kind of infrastructure. So I think there's a real role for the DDA as we start to convert some of these spaces that were used for surface lots into the kind of spaces that can support some, diversity of businesses, and work on some of these equity issues, work on some of these climate issues. I think there's a real role for the DDA to play, and I think if in listening to both the staff and those who serve on the DDA board, that there's real expertise on this body that can be leveraged, and I think it would be smart for many of us on council to listen to learn more about some of these best practices. I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration and from learning from one another, so that we should be having more conversations about what are our policy priorities, why aren't we making those clearer for you, so that we can have a better collaborative, symbiotic relationship where we're working towards these goals. Also, I just, thinking about this issue of safety and coming back to the beginning of our meeting, and when we look at the improvements that are being made, people want to feel safe in many ways when they come downtown, and they don't want to feel like they're going to be hit by a car. So working on these improvements that will increase our pedestrian safety, I think, is another place that there's a role for the DDA, and one I'm speaking more to, not as much as the role, but how we can collaborate, because I'd like to have more of these conversations, and was really encouraged last year when we started talking about working on housing, and I'm sorry we don't get to do that tonight.
Councilor Ronaldo.
Well, we might have a few minutes for housing. Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I'm going to shock the world here, at least this body, and just say, when it comes to raising or expanding the enforcement hours for metered parking, I wouldn't object to going to 7. Push it an hour.
We'll flip for
Go to 7, and I think 6 is sometimes too early, frankly. So, but I would like to say, I think Councilmember Lum had brought it up. What are we doing with these proceeds? And I had said it before, if we're going to take the extra money that we're going to be collecting from these metered spaces to help small business owners, why don't it go directly into a program that helps small business owners, rather than this reason that we're trying to turn spaces over to help the folks? Well, let's take that money and actually put it into maybe some tax abatement zones. Let's get in some incubator sites going for some small retail businesses, art studios. Take that $4 million that's projected to come from those 4 years from that raised parking rate, and help the small businesses directly with the money that comes from it. That's what, I would gladly support that if that was the case, rather than it just going into a general fund and then help subsidize some other part of the losing enterprise, which I think currently, which I've stated before, which is the structures. So I just wanted to go out and say that. And when we talk about our future, I think it is right now to tackle the affordable housing. We have the Y site that needs to be talked about, and we have 415, which is going to be soon talked about. And I appreciate the DDA's commitment to that by providing the $75,000 for the community engagement to occur on 415. So I just going to leave it at that.
Thank you. So last year when we were together, we just discussed the fact that fundamentally the DDA has accomplished its goal of fighting the deteriorating downtown. And I thought that we had discussed the need to really set out a new purpose, or a statement of purpose or goals. And some of us talked about possibly the new purpose would be affordability. There were other ideas that came forward, but I really hope that the DDA board will try to express a new goal for their existence, what they seek to accomplish. The state statute actually talks about having a development plan. To me, that's an idea of what you wish to accomplish over the next few years, and I'm not sure that we have a clear sense of that in our downtown. I recall that in 2013, when council placed a cap on the TIF revenues, there was a lot of complaining that this would really harm the DDA's ability to do what it does, and yet the revenues have grown from $3.7 million then to about 6.2 or 6.3 million now. I don't think that you lack for money. And so I really hope that the DDA board will strive to describe what they're going to do with that money with a future-looking plan so that this year we can tell our constituents what you intend to do 3 and 5 years out. Because often, the question I get from my constituents is, why do we still have a DDA? And I think that if you set a statement of purpose and a set of goals, you'll help me answer that question. And I encourage you to do that. I really appreciate everybody coming out tonight and talking with us, because it really helps us explore these issues. But we can work together if we actually formulate a purpose and a plan, I think. And I will actually oppose any extension of traffic enforcement into the evening. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, to close things up before public comment, I guess I'd just like to also extend my thanks, of course, to council members who are here and are on the regular with work sessions, but with particularity to folks in the DDA for whom an evening meeting is, as I understand it, not the usual course. The downtown is one of the jewels of Ann Arbor. It's a vital and active arts center, entertainment center, education center, place for really everyone in Ann Arbor, and frankly for people outside the city to come and enjoy what we all together have built. Obviously that has been built in many respects by the people who show up and work every day, whether you're in a nonprofit or a business or a service provider or a goods provider. But I think it's plain that we have a downtown that has been built in major part and owes a great deal of debt of thanks to the DDAs that have come before, and I would extend those thanks to the DDAs that we have now. It is our downtown works, as Councilmember Hayner, I think, pointed out reasonably so. We have problems, but they're problems that arise from our successes. And that doesn't mean that we should ignore them or that we will be complacent with respect to them. But the fact that our challenges are a result of our successes should, I think, give us a bit of pause and a bit of pride. I think we have a good thing going, and our common goal is to ensure that it stays that way. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, and so please pay close attention to me waving, at which point 3 minutes will have expired. And finally, if you require assistance or a stool in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at public comment?
Hello, my name is Edward Vilmetti. By way of identification and not endorsement, I am a member of Workentile, which is a co-working space in downtown Ann Arbor on South Main Street. We serve a number of people, whether they be graduate students looking for a quiet place to write their dissertation, or remote workers like myself who works for a company somewhere else, small businesses to the tune of 1 or 2 people, whatnot. So one of the tremendously generous benefits that I have as a Workentile member is a Go Pass, which is marvelous. It lets me get downtown promptly and safely. And it's very valuable to us as a collective to be able to say to people, well, your membership does not come with parking, but it comes with a bus pass. And as it turns out, for a large number of people, having a bus pass is an adequate substitute for parking. It's not a substitute perfectly, and so people commute by a variety of means, including via bicycle. And what's terrifying to me is that with a relatively small number of people in this organization, less than 100, we've had 3 people have car-bicycle accidents in the last 2 months. To the point where I'm reluctant to ride my bike downtown, that I do not have a safe route to downtown with the current infrastructure. Now, I'm looking forward to the new bikeway. It means that if I carefully use alleyways, and I'm careful within the downtown, which is a difficult spot to negotiate, that I will have a safe route to the diag, and I'm pretty sure I have a safe route from the diag to my kids' former elementary school, and then from that school to home. So I can probably put together a route that I'm not terrified about. But I've tried the bicycle commute from Pioneer High School to downtown, and that's a mess. I mean, there's just like no easy, simple, straightforward, you don't have to know what the streets are like way to do that. So I think we have a lot, the schools are working on safe routes to schools, right? The whole concept that you need to plan out in advance some infrastructure so that the kids can walk to school or kids can bike to school, like my kid bikes to school. And we also need to be planning the sort of safe routes to downtown. Like, if you're taking a bike downtown, try to avoid the Packard and State intersection. Not a good intersection for cars or people or anyone. And I'm very much looking forward to bicycling across the diag and having a safe way to get to the diag. So, with that, I leave you.
Thank you.
I work at the University of Michigan, but these are my thoughts only. I don't represent the University of Michigan. Councilmember Eaton, I'm really happy that you brought up South University. That area does have a problem with parking. There are cars that do circle around and they're looking for spots. And I would argue that it's actually easy to get in and out of that parking lot. I park there quite a bit. I do know how to get in and out of that rather easily. But the issue is not that, in my opinion, it's not that there needs to be more parking. What it is, you have to differentiate between University of Michigan employees and those who are not U of M employees. So as a U of M employee, sometimes when I work late, I arrive late. And so I'll arrive at 10 o'clock, and when I arrive at 10 o'clock, there are no U of M parking spots available. And so what that does mean is, yeah, I got to circle around and do all that. So yeah, I add to the congestion. And so he's right, it does come from congestion. But that to me signals that that's a problem between, I don't know who to address. I don't know if I should address you guys or the U of M regents. It's a space management issue. And someone has to kind of deal with that, trying to figure out how do you, I don't know how that's done. Do you get more spots? Do you have, I don't really know. I don't know the answer to that question. But the reason I know that there's parking spots is because when I can't get a parking spot as a U of M employee, I go pull a ticket. I pull a ticket, I can drive up there and I can find a parking spot. So there is always enough parking for me to park there. But it's a matter of, do I go as a U of M employee or do I go as, just an average person grabbing a ticket? I can always find a spot there. And so that's the part to me, is that it's annoying to me that I think that there needs to be more U of M parking allocated there. I don't know the mechanism involved for that. I don't know what it is. But I would also encourage you to, if you were to invest something there, it wouldn't be for more parking. It would be more for better technology to count the available parking spots there. That might be the thing that might solve the whole problem to figure this thing out. The other day, I remember I arrived at 10:45, and I pulled up there, and they said, sorry, the U of M parking was full, and the normal parking was, the sign says normal parking's full. But I can see that on the lower level, which opens up parking spots at 10:30 a.m., that whole bottom level was empty. I see the parking spots. So I went inside and I complained. I said, hey, those are empty. I want in, please. They give a phone call, and someone then opened up more spots. So I know those spots can be opened up and closed based on a phone call. And so that, to me, the issue at South University is not an issue of making more parking spots. It is a space management issue that needs to be addressed. In another matter, I just wanted to wish my congratulations to Postima for winning yet another thing with the FTD lawsuit. Otherwise, have a good night. Just me, Kai, the devil's advocate.
Thank you.
I'm Adam Oxner. Just have a few points that I think I'll be short. But first, I think this meeting overall is about DDA and council communicating freely, and I think that to Councilmember Romalawi's point, transparency is really important. And I know there are a lot of questions about numbers that came up on both sides that people are arguing about, and I would encourage you to look into ways to more frequently update, probably from the DDA side to City Council. I know there's like the State of Downtown report that I look forward to reading every year, but maybe quarterly updates, or I don't know. I'm also a techie, so I'm imagining some cool dashboard where I can like play with graphs, but that might be a pipe dream. Also, I think that the Ann and Ashley structure expansion is, I think, a good compromise, because I'm actually really dislike having a lot of cars downtown, but I think that I would also love to see those surface lots become like large mixed-use developments where more people can live downtown and work downtown, and there might be a grocery store downtown. That'd be cool. But I think we can't just like ban all the cars from downtown immediately, although maybe in the far future. And then for the street parking hours, I think it might be something. So I heard that graduated pricing is difficult, but I think it would be cool if we had some really cheap pricing, like maybe 50 cents an hour after the 6 p.m. to still make it really easy for people to come downtown. Maybe it would help turnover, and also it would help the DDA and council understand demand better in downtown. It's something like, I don't know the term, but like when you have like a 0.1% tax on something, just to be able to measure it, I think that would be helpful. And then also Councilmember Ramlawi's incubator idea or something like that, where money is going directly to small business owners downtown, I think would be a good complement to a lot of the pedestrian safety things that I see coming downtown, and might be worth exploring. And overall, I'm a huge fan of the DDA's work, and I think they're a really big apparatus of the city. And I love the covered parking structure, or sorry, the covered biking parking that I use every day at the 4th and Washington structure. So thanks for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. Thanks, everyone. Let's call it a day.